Hello 7-6, this is your 5th week of studying dystopian fiction and the elements that go towards creating such a novel. This week our focus will be, as you can see on the screen, characters and characterization. So how we can produce and recognise the different sorts of characters that you would find in dystopian fiction, and as I said, how we can produce those characters ourselves. So if you're reading a dystopian novel, or you've read one before, or maybe you've seen a film, you'll already know what type of characters to expect. Now, we've discussed this in some of the lessons previous to this one already a little bit anyway. Below we've got a typical list of characters that you might find in a dystopian novel. Now, these aren't exclusive to a dystopian novel. Many of these you'll find in other genres of literature. You might find other characters that don't come under either of any of these titles as well, but these are the ones that are very commonly found in this sort of fiction. So, the protagonist. So you've probably heard of a protagonist before. Now, they're one of the main characters, if not the main character, and they probably feel that something is wrong with society, or they feel trapped and want to escape the situation that they're in. They're questioning the existing society that they live in, and they want to change something about that. They're usually very brave, and these characters allow the reader to experience the dystopian society through their eyes. So often you will see everything through their perspective. You'll kind of be a part of their team as such. There'll also be an oppressive leader or group. So we talked about how this often leads into the theme of disparity between social classes, the haves and the have-nots. So there'll often be a leader or a group that are in charge. It could perhaps be the government themselves. And also you may find a character that's based on technological or scientific advances. So something that's new and different. For example, it could be an alien, a robot, a monster. It might even be the inventor of a certain piece of technology, or the creator of a system. Now, can you think of any characters that fit these descriptions? So just have a quick think, as you'll do now. You might be able to recognise some of the characters on the right. Maybe try and work out which title you think they'd come under. Are they a protagonist? Are they an oppressor or a leader or group? Or have they made some sort of advance in science or technology? Or might they be that very thing that has been advanced? Now, once you've done that, we will have a look at what we're doing this week. So, going back to this slide, hopefully one of the characters that you were able to put a name to is this fella here. So this is Frankenstein, or how we as a modern audience often visualise Frankenstein, thanks to one of the films that was made about him. Now, Frankenstein is a fictional monster who was created by a character known as Victor. And the author of this book was a lady called Mary Shelley. So there she is in that portrait picture on the top left-hand corner. Now, she was alive a long time ago, between 1797 and 1851. So she was a very young English novelist, and she wrote predominantly in the Gothic genre. And Frankenstein itself is a Gothic dystopian novel. She also edited and promoted the works of her husband, who was a famous Romanticist poet, called Percy Bysshe Shelley. So when you're a little bit older and you're studying your GCSEs, we look at some of the poetry that he produced. He's a very, very famous poet. Now, Shelley, so Mary Shelley, she lived in a time of great industrial and social change. So as you might be aware through studying in history, this period of time, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing in the UK, or across the world really, in the what we count as the Western world. Lots of advances in technology and industry, lots of people moving from very rural agricultural environments into big cities and areas where there was employment. Britain's empire was vast, so the countries that we'd colonised, so countries such as India, Australia, New Zealand, countries in the Caribbean, all over Africa, Burma, other countries like that, Singapore. All of these countries were part of our empire, so we had gone with our armies and conquered them, either peacefully or through war, and they were now under British rule. And there was a new movement of artists, and by artists we mean poets, authors, painters, sculptors, playwrights, actors, actresses, and they were called the Romanticist movement. Now, the Romanticist movement, we associate with the word romance with love and relationships. Now, it doesn't really stand for that in this case. The Romanticists believe that that the kind of regulated and scientific world that they were living in wasn't necessarily the right one, and that people should have more free spirit and free thought and free feelings. And they wanted people to use that as inspiration for their creativity. So they like to, instead of put a focus on the power of technology and science, they preferred to look at nature and how the power of nature influenced us as a human race and what nature could offer us. And if they very much wrote about natural wonders such as mountains and mountain ranges, oceans, even down to things like plants, life itself, animals, and they really wanted to demonstrate just how wonderful this natural world that we lived in was. Now, Mary Shelley, she wrote Frankenstein when she was very young. She was only 21 years of age, and she actually wrote it after being stuck in a storm with a group of friends while they were travelling, doing something called the Grand Tour, where you go round, if you were wealthy of that time, came from a well-financed family. When you hit your late teens and early 20s, you could go on something called a Grand Tour, which would mean you would go and explore places like Egypt and various places in Europe. You might go down to further into Africa. You might look at go and visit some of Asia. And while you were there, you were going to see lots of antiquities, so places of cultural and historical importance, and geographical places of geographical interest as well. And you bring back lots of mementos and souvenirs, I suppose we'd call it now, from these places. So while she was on her Grand Tour, she was stuck somewhere in Europe, I believe, in a storm with a group of friends. In that particular environment, it was quite, scary. So they decided to write ghost stories. They were all writers. She was with her husband, Percy Shelley, at the time, and they decided to write ghost stories and have a bit of competition between themselves. And that's where the story Frankenstein kind of developed. It's one of the very first examples of dystopian and gothic fiction, and it challenged many of the beliefs at the time. So many of you might know that Frankenstein, you could associate that with the gothic genre, but you might not automatically associate it with dystopian fiction. We've got a few bullet points here about why we could say that it's dystopian. So Frankenstein itself is a cautionary tale about the applications of science and technology. So the character Victor creates this other being that he wants to be perfect, and ultimately that being Frank goes on to chase him and eventually take his life. So it's kind of saying these things that we want to create to maybe make our lives better or make us happier might ultimately destroy us. So there's that element of technological advances that maybe are not helping us. This monster, in inverted commas, is inhuman. So although he's made up of various human body parts, and the hubris and irresponsibility of its creator. So the hubris means an excessive pride or self-confidence, so almost an arrogance. So the arrogance and irresponsibility of this creator to think that by making this monster out of all these various human parts, that he would be nice and kind and have empathy. So it's kind of saying, don't think, how can you think that these man-made creations can have the same characteristics of humans? Obviously people at the time weren't trying to create monsters such as seen in Frankenstein. However, maybe there was a metaphor there for the lack of humanity that was occurring because of all these technological advances in the Industrial Revolution, etc. We know that a lot of the factories were particularly nasty places to work. Children were used for really awful jobs. Many children died. It's also believed to be a metaphor for the French Revolution. So the French Revolution took part in 1789, and the Romanticist movement, so writers like Mary Shelley and her husband Percy, were very much inspired by the French Revolution. So if you don't know about the French Revolution, Google it. However, a very, very short, probably not wildly accurate description is in France, there was a great disparity, so difference between the very, very wealthy and very, very poor. And there was in Britain. However, the difference was that in France, the people felt that they could overrule and get rid of these aristocrats and people with great money, or the bourgeoisie as they referred to them then, and that if they got rid of these people, their life would be an awful lot better. France as a whole was a much poorer country. If you were poor, you were very often much poorer than you were in Britain. So we had industry and various structures for people to be able to earn money, albeit small amounts. In France, there wasn't really that, and the poor would see the aristocracy, the bourgeoisie, the rich, living an extremely luxurious lifestyle. They had an excess of everything. So basically the people rose up in 1789 and started overthrowing the power. So if you've seen the film Les Miserables, that has a lot of French Revolution scenes in it. And they used the guillotine, so where we get the word guillotine from, you've probably seen or know an image of it as like a big blade that came down and chopped off their heads. So the Romanticist movement believed in very similar things as the French Revolutionaries. Not necessarily they wanted to chop off aristocrats' heads, but that actually we should question the rule that they have. We shouldn't just take it as gospel for what they told us, and we should maybe question and try and change the way that we live. You might refer to them now as almost a little bit socialist, so they believe in the good of everybody, not just the individual. So anyway, that's a bit about the author, Mary Shelley of Frankenstein, which is the abstract we're going to look at, and why you might say that the book Frankenstein could be dystopian. So, after my waffle, this is the extract. So I'm going to read it through, and what I'd like you to do is then read it through yourself as well, and make sure you've read through it at least 3 times before you start the questions that follow. And in the blue box we have a glossary of terms, which are also highlighted in bold through the text that you might not be sure of. If there's any other words in here that aren't in that glossary of terms and you're unsure, just look them up in a dictionary or use the power of Google. So here we go. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning, and the rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavoured to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful, Great God, his yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same colour as the dun white sockets in which they were set. His shrivelled complexion and straight black lips. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video and read through again at least 3 times so you can become familiar with what they're talking about in this extract, and then restart. So hopefully you've read through this 3 times, you've become familiar, at least 3 times, sorry. You familiarise yourself with the words and the vocabulary used, and Googled anything that we haven't got a description for, so you've got a really clear picture of what's happening. So what is happening? This is the part of the novel where the creator, Frankenstein himself, is, really observing what it is that he's created. So it's just before he brings it to life. And we have a vast amount of information here of all descriptive writing, descriptive words, that really creates an image in our minds of exactly what the monster looks like. So it discusses about his limbs, about the features on his face, about the colour of his skin, the colour of his hair, about the muscles that are that you can see in the arteries, so the veins beneath, about his teeth, about his eyes. And then we also have a nice bit at the top here all about the setting. So we looked at setting last week. So it sounds quite ominous and scary. It was a dreary night in November. We know November's quite a cold month. He discusses about the rain that pattered dismally on the window. He only has a candle for light. And that what he's created is just starting to come to life. So he's infusing, a spark of being, so some electricity into this monster to try and get it to come to life. So hopefully you got that from this extract. Now you've got tasks 1 to 3 here. So hopefully you've already pretty much completed task 1. So read the extract from Frankenstein at least 3 times. The extract is from chapter 5 and it depicts the creature being brought to life. And the novel itself introduced the idea of a mad scientist to popular culture. So Victor Frankenstein, he is the mad scientist. So you've hopefully done that already. So you'll need to do task 2, which is to highlight or underline or write down any quotes that describe the setting. So you'd be looking mostly at the first paragraph for that. The monster, so there's information throughout for that. And Frankenstein. So remember, he's the scientist, not the monster. A lot of people think Frankenstein is that... here is this guy, and it's not. Frankenstein is the creator of him. He is known as the monster. So we want a description of the setting, the monster, the thing with the bolts through his neck, and then Frankenstein, the creator. So any quotes that describe those things. Then your third task is to write one of the quotes that you've highlighted down and explain what it suggests about the thing that it's describing. So for instance, you could describe I'm trying to choose one. I would go for so let's go for lustrous black. So if you wanted to use that quote, you might say, Shelley describes the monster as having lustrous black hair. This suggests that the monster's hair is quite attractive. So lustrous means that it's very vivid, it's silky, in that kind of Pantene advert where they swish the hair and it's all silky. That sort of look. It looks healthy. So Shelley describes the monster as having lustrous black hair. This creates the image of a of the monster where he has attractive hair, or his hair looks good. And then you might want to say something like, which contrasts with the idea of a monster, because we associate monsters as being unattractive. You could also say this suggests that the monster has human features, such as a full head of hair. Then if you, I don't know where that's come up, sorry. If you fancy having a challenge task, I'd like you to then write a minimum of 2 paragraphs in response to this question, which is, how does Shelley create and convey setting and character in this extract? So you'd want to pick up on any descriptive language about the setting or the characters in the extract for that question. So I'd pause the video now, have a go at questions 2 and 3 here, because you should have already had a go at question 1, and then the challenge if you fancy. Then restart when you're ready. Hopefully you've had a go at those tasks. Now your 4th task is, and your final task, is to create your own dystopian character. So last week we created our own dystopian setting, and I let you know that ultimately we'll be writing our own short dystopian story. Now you need to create a character for that story. So you should have an idea of what dystopia is and some of the typical characters often found in those stories, and what a dystopian character might look like. So today we're going to create our own dystopian character, and then use the plan on the next slide to get some ideas before you draw your character. So ultimately I'd like you to draw an image of your character with labels telling me about them. So it could be, if we were drawing around this lady here, it might be a bow and arrow to fight off whoever the arch enemy was, or the oppressive leadership that they lived under. It could be clothes similar to armour to show that they're a warrior, or that they're willing to fight, something like that. And I'd like you to plan or draw more than one character if you like, but no more than 2. So if you want to do 1, that's fine. If you'd like to do 2, that's fine, but no more than that. Now, as I've said, you're going to write your own piece of dystopian fiction very soon. And this character could be the protagonist, or the main character, the hero, or it might be the antagonist, so the rival of that protagonist, or the enemy of your story. You might want to draw the protagonist and the antagonist if you choose to do 2. For your plan, it would be useful to do a spider diagram like this. So in the middle, a dystopian character, and then just these 6 titles round the middle of your spider diagram, and then address each of them. So who is your main character? Make sure that they make sense together. So I wouldn't choose something like an urban environment is your setting, if that's what you worked on last week, and then your character to be who could it be? Somebody that lives in the ocean, something like that. A fisherman maybe, who's fighting for control of the seas. It wouldn't make sense because you're in a city. So make sure that your setting and your characters go together. Their appearance and their personality. Who's their main rival? Excuse me. What makes them dystopian? So have they been affected by the world they live in? What is it that they're trying to achieve? Maybe what's their backstory? And what's their purpose in the story? So what are they aiming to do? What are they trying to do? What group are they part of? What fights do they have? And any other details or ideas that you might want to include. And then once you've done that plan, I would do a little image, a drawing of your character with some annotations giving kind of key information for them. So hopefully that's pretty clear what I'd like you to do this week. And this is all due on Monday the 13th of July, so a week today. I will carry on with feedback for you all as I have been. I'm just sending it to you individually, which is really nice. Some of you respond, which is lovely. But I would just like to say, for those of you that have been consistently working hard through all of this lockdown period, well done to you. Many of you have produced outstanding work. Some of your work is better than the work you've produced in class before, which is wonderful, but also means that next year we're going to expect that same high level, even when you're surrounded by your friends who are fun to chat to. But overall, you should all be really proud of yourselves. It's been extraordinary times, and I think most people have coped incredibly well and really tried their best. So any questions or anything like that, please give me an email. Submit your work through email or on Teams, whichever you prefer. I wish you all the best and take care.